Joining us now, representative from Georgia, Congressman, Republican from the 8th District, that's kind of the central south area of Georgia, is Austin Scott. Congressman Scott, it's been a long time. Great to have you, man.
Last time I saw you in person, I think we were in Fulton County, Georgia.
I know, right? I think we had you, we were sponsoring a debate when you were running for governor, right? Remember that?
That's right.
Somewhere a long time ago. And I always got to tell this story. You were running for governor. There were a bunch of high-profile candidates, right? Congressman Nathan Deal and Karen Handel was in it, and a bunch of other. There was a state senator from the South. Can't remember him. But there was a bunch of people in it. And so Austin Scott does this. This is one of the first time this was done. He does this walk through Georgia or something. And he started, I don't know, all the way up in the Appalachian Trail in Dalton or something, and walked through the state, through Atlanta, and it took you like, what, 2-3 weeks, didn't it?
I think Remember it was 63 days with a very short feet. It was 1,068 miles, and Walking Lawton did it in Florida, and that's where the idea came from. And, you know, John, we didn't have the money for the race, and our concept was you got 159 counties. If you can raise $100 for 100 people in 159 counties, you don't have to take any PAC money. And that would be $1.59 million, and that'd be enough to run the race. And, of course, now the races cost 20 or 30 times that.
I know. It's like in Virginia for
good for our democracy.
In Virginia for the House of Delegates, which is like your House of Representatives. And I just got this the other day. One of the states that we cover extensively, they spent $65 million on this past cycle's House of Delegates races. Just an ungodly amount of money. Hey, Congressman, if you could do us a favor, I just got a note from our producer here. If you could take us off the speakerphone for our listeners, that would be a little bit clearer. Let's get to impeachment. Your colleague in Georgia, Doug Collins, a mutual friend of ours, blasting the process. But now impeachment is real. Obviously, Pelosi has the votes for impeachment. Congressman, what is your assessment of this whole thing?
Well, if you watch our friend, and I'm on a speakerphone, I apologize. I don't have one I can't pick up the handset on this particular.
No worries.
Piece. I'll try to speak close into the issue.
No worries.
Watched Doug Collins the other day when he got to start cross-examining Daniel Goldman, who's Adam Schiff's lawyer, because Adam Schiff didn't have the courage to show up to the meeting. Daniel Goldman said, well, you pick an event of significance in the investigation and you start to build the circumstantial case. And basically that's what they've done. They have just built a circumstantial case against the president. It is they have former law professors that are saying that if the president had any evidence of his innocence, that he should bring it forward. Well, certainly that's the way it works in socialist countries around the world, countries like Cuba and Venezuela and other things, that you attack your political enemies and they have to prove their innocence. That's not the way it's supposed to work in America, John. And the sad thing about all of this is that I think it's reset, if you will, the standard going forward for impeaching the president. If they're going to abide by this, if they're going to change the standard to what they've changed it to, then every future president of the United States will be impeached unless they control the House of Representatives.
So they have politicized it, right? So now what you have is, basically, if you've got a Democratic president and a Republican-controlled Congress, and you don't like the president's policies, or you don't like the way he chews gum, or what he tweets out, or an interview he did, or whatever you don't like, you can just make up things for impeachment and go forward with it and tie the country up in knots for months, right? I mean, that's basically what they've done.
Sure. I mean, if we had used the same standard, I mean, you could go back. If we had used the same standard, you've got Benghazi, you've got the open mic comment by Barack Obama, where he told the president of Russia, you know, hey, tell Vladimir that as soon as the election's over, I'll change my policies. You could go back to the VA scandal. You could go back to Lois Lerner. You could go back. I mean, if this is going to, if the standard that they're going to use to impeach President Trump is going to be the standard that's used going forward, then every president in the future of this country that does not control the House, whose party does not control the House of Representatives, will be impeached.
And you know what, Congressman Scott, I think it was Alexander Hamilton, right, that warned against that. And one of the things about the Constitution he didn't approve of was the impeachment clause. And his view was just beat the president in an ensuing election because he predicted this would happen.
Well, and if you look back historically, you've had enough character in the leaders of the House that you haven't had this happen. I mean, Clinton, we had Clinton's in '99, and then you got to go all the way back to, of course, we had Nixon, but then you had Andrew Johnson in 1868.
Right.
But Nixon resigned, but I mean, they're throwing this thing out as if it's as if there's nothing to it. And this issue is so serious, John. One of the things that's not being talked about is once it passes the House of Representatives, I think the Senate has 5 days to adopt the rules. But once those rules are adopted, I don't know if the Senate can do anything other than the impeachment trial.
No, they can't. In fact, Senator McConnell, the majority leader, has cleared the calendar for January, cleared it, wiped it out. There's nothing else on the Senate calendar. I mean, can you imagine this? We're going into an election year, and the entire month of January, from when they get back January 4th through January 31st, he has cleared the calendar for nothing but the impeachment trial. And this is the other thing, Congressman, that people don't realize. This is a trial. If you're a U.S. Senator, it's like showing up for jury duty, right? You have to be there. You can't be out. Bernie Sanders can't be out campaigning in Iowa. Either can Beth Warren. They have got to show up there. Same thing with Cory Booker. They've got to be sitting there 15 hours a day, 5 days a week. So they can only campaign on the weekends. I mean, this thing is a total mess. But you're right. There's the rules, and they're going to have to follow them, which gets us to USMCA, which we have been pushing for. Finally passes with some minor revisions yesterday. But now the Senate is telling us, look, we can't get to this until mid-February because of impeachment. The changes made to USMCA, can you live with those, Congressman?
Yes, absolutely. John, our request, and this affected the Georgia and the Florida growers, where we do a lot of fruit and vegetables, as you know, and if you look at the parallels on the globe, our growing season is the same as Mexico's. And so there are certain labor practices and other things in Mexico that give them a significant advantage over U.S. farmers. And we have, Secretary Lighthouser and the administration have agreed to some, it'll effectively be reporting issues and things that are happening with regard to Mexico that give them a competitive advantage over U.S. agriculture. But we're very appreciative of the administration and the Secretary working with us to get language that will help expose where growing practices or chemicals that are illegal to use in the United States. If those are being done in Mexico, then we want to make sure that the U.S. consumers are aware of those.
When you look at USMCA, there's some estimates say that it's going to have a huge impact on U.S. farmers, the timber industry, dairy farmers, but also light and medium manufacturing, small businesses. When Mike Pence, the vice president, was on my show the other day, he said that it could actually increase U.S. GDP by a full 1%. Like it can go to 2.5% growth to 3.5%. Are you as excited about USMCA as I am, and why or why not?
Look, I think trade's good for America. I think USMCA is part of it. I think the other thing that we've got to go back and revisit is making sure that we're continuing to update our trade agreements with Southeast Asia as well. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is not something that we're going to be a part of, but we need access to those Asian markets. I think the president has done a good job with China. I think any other president would have folded their cards with China. China is not our friend. In fact, I would go so far as to say China is our enemy. I recognize that having them as a trade partner is certainly better than not having them as a trade partner, but they have taken advantage of America for a long, long time, and I'm thankful that we have a president that's putting an end to that. USMCA, I think, is the first one that will be adopted, but I have every confidence in the world that the president is going to get to a good trade deal with China as well. And, all we need is a square deal in America. You give us a square deal and we'll beat you.
Well, the president campaigned on getting out of these multinational trade agreements like TPP and going to more of a bilateral set of trades, whether it be with the United Kingdom, China, Vietnam. He's looking for one-on-one, mano-a-mano bilateral trades, which he says are in the best interest of the U.S. rather than being these global type things with all their own rules. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth, live in Washington, D.C. We're with Congressman Republican Austin Scott. He represents the 8th District of Georgia, my old stomping ground, and that is kind of central and heading south, Georgia, way south of Atlanta in the suburbs. Congressman Scott, I want to get to a couple other things that now that impeachment is done, even though it's going to the Senate, they're going to vote on it. You're going to get no Republican votes, probably 5 or 6 Dems go the other way. But let's get to a couple other important issues. And one of them that we've been covering is getting rid of or stopping surprise medical billing, which is affecting now thousands of Americans. I've covered it because it happened to me. I got a $7,200 surprise bill in the mail. I had no idea what it was for after a procedure I had done. I had nothing to do with it, but yet I'm stuck with the bill. And if you don't pay it, you get a judgment, you get garnished, all that stuff. Right. And there's two approaches. One is rate setting, where the government comes in and sets the rate. And the other one is arbitration, where the patient is removed from the debate and we get this worked out. So you're not home one day, you open up your mail and get a $10,000 bill. And I think rate setting is a disaster. Have you investigated any of these, and kind of where do you stand on it, sir?
Absolutely. And let's remember the third option, which may be the best option, is the states have the ability to adopt laws that protect the consumer as well. And so the state of Georgia and many other states have already adopted laws, and it pains me somewhat to say it, but the New York model is actually a pretty good model, and that is similar to what the state of Georgia has adopted. And this is, John, healthcare is it's not really a free market, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we don't get to choose when we need it. We don't get to choose what we need.
Right.
The Affordable Care Act took insurance competition away, and by the way, left the health insurance industry exempt from the antitrust laws of the country while we got a mandate to purchase their product. And mm-hmm. How has that worked out? If you were if you're a shareholder in United Healthcare or Humana or Aetna, it worked out pretty good for you. But if you're the guy paying the bills on the outside, it has hurt. It hurt my family, and it's hurt the vast majority of Americans. I do think that there is an agreement on the surprise medical billing. It was announced on December the 9th, and the key issue here, John, is it is one of the first pieces of legislation that actually gives the healthcare consumer rights. And one of the things that is a problem for us as patients is we have very little competition in the insurance industry, so we don't have the right, if you will, to pick our own plan anymore. Who our plan contracts with as the physician is who we end up having to see or pay the out-of-pocket cost. And even if we go to a surgeon who's in the network, there may be a radiologist or an anesthesiologist or an emergency room physician that's out of network, and
right.
We just get skewered with these bills.
Right.
Unreasonable. And so it's not perfect, but it does give the healthcare consumer some rights. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, John, the thing that I would encourage people to do is keep pushing your state legislators to work on this issue as well, because the law passed in the state of Georgia this past year. The states move significantly faster than we do. But for the first time, at least in the state of Georgia, you're going to have some state protections, and I do believe you'll have some federal protections on this that will send this into arbitration, but not rate setting.
John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with Austin Scott, Republican Congressman, 8th District, Georgia. That's the South Central area. Congressman Scott, let me ask you this. What about prescription drugs? It looks like you guys had a deal. I talked to your colleague Bobby Scott the other day. Like there was a deal with prescription drug pricing worked out. Nancy Pelosi got a hold of it and put things in there that now Republicans can't vote for. What is the status of this now?
Well, again, this is one of those things that if you took the squad and people who think like that out of the equation, then we would have a bill that probably 90% of the members of the House would vote for, that would put transparency and competition into the pharmaceutical model.
Right.
And, unfortunately, as has happened with impeachment, a select small group of people are driving the agenda of the Democratic Party, and the Nancy Pelosi of years gone by would have had the ability to control them, but now they seem to control her. And so the chairman of the committee had to relent to the furthest left of his party to get the votes to pass the legislation, when if they would have been willing to work with the Republicans instead of the more liberal factions of their party, you could have had a bipartisan piece of legislation. But her goal, understand this, Nancy Pelosi does not want to put legislation on the floor that Republicans will vote for. She does not want Republicans having the ability to go home and saying, I voted to do this to help you with health care costs. It's just not in her mindset. And so she would rather cave to the 10% of the left in her party so that they have a 100% Democratic bill than to work with the people in the Republican Party and get a bill that 90% of us would actually vote for.
So she would rather fail the American people than give a victory to Republicans or President Trump.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And, John, as someone who served at the state level before I came to the federal level, it wasn't like this at the state level. Mm-hmm. I had a piece of legislation. One of the big issues in pharmaceutical pricing is how much money the pharmacy benefit managers siphon out of the system. They provide absolutely nothing of value to the consumer, and in many cases they get more than the actual drug manufacturer does in the form of rebates. And it was about 20 years ago I put in a piece of legislation that would have required, at the state level, that would have required them to disclose the rebate to the end user. Mm-hmm. So if you went to the pharmacy and you got a prescription filled, Caremark or Caremark or whoever else,
right.
The names have changed so much because they've consolidated so much. They've effectively monopolized. That they would have to share with you, the consumer, what the rebate was. It did not mandate that they couldn't receive a rebate, but it put transparency in the process.
And so that's what we need at the federal level. I mean, but I think what's aggravating to so many people, Congressman Scott, is we had a bill, like you said, 90% of Congress would have voted for it, both sides of the aisle, and she had to cave to the 10%. But it was the poison pill. What your assertion is, she did that purposefully in order to just have it so it can't pass, and then she could throw up her hands and say, well, McConnell didn't take it up. We need a Democratic Senate, right? I mean, that's her plan instead of getting something done now. All right, I'm almost out of time. I got under a minute. Can Republicans win the House back 2020?
Absolutely. And the interesting thing, John, I'll tell you, is if they had worked with President Trump on anything, if they had worked with him on immigration, if they had worked with him on transportation, if they had worked with him on those issues, I think they might have beaten him in the next election, because our party, it may have fractured our party, but they have absolutely unified the Republican Party. And these people that are in these Trump districts, like them or not, that voted to impeach the president already, because if you voted for the process, you voted for the impeachment, those people, some of them are sitting in Trump plus 3, Trump plus 4, Trump plus 5 districts. Well, if Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden is their nominee, people aren't going to walk in and vote for President Trump and then turn around and vote for a Democrat who voted to impeach him.
Right.
And once this thing gets to the Senate, isn't it going to be interesting if we start to subpoena the travel records of Hunter Biden and see if he actually went to the Ukraine on a monthly basis for his $50,000 a month?
Right.
And that's and if he did go to the Ukraine, how did he travel?
Right.
I mean, there are more questions than surrounding Hunter Biden than there are Donald Trump. And if one of President Trump's children had done that, who by the way are all wonderful people, regardless of what the press wants you to believe about President Trump's kids, they're all great people. If one of them had done that, they would be screaming to put them in prison right now.
Exactly. I mean, the double standard is just incredible. I'm out of time, but I just got one more quick question. Have you endorsed anybody in the Republican primary in Georgia's 6th district? That's Tom Price's old seat that was lost in the midterms. I think Brandon Beach just got out. There's Karen Handel and a few others. Have you picked anybody in that race?
Karen's a great friend of mine. We've been friends a long time, and so my wife and I are supportive of Karen's campaign. And she was a good member when she was here. She's been through a lot. I think she deserves a chance to come back and govern again. And so, I'm certainly supportive of Karen Handel.
Congressman Austin Scott, thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate it.